even though it seems like it was weeks ago already. I think that's just how the news makes us feel, just inundated with it all the time. But I think it's important just here at the beginning, just to begin with a word on the passing of our Holy Father, Pope Francis. His funeral was just yesterday morning, and now we begin what's called the Novem Dialis, which is the 9 days of mourning for his passing. I was in my first year of seminary when Pope Francis was elected, and so since day one of me being a professional Catholic, since day one, he's very much shaped my formation as a priest, but then these early years of priesthood. One of the chief things he's done is he's placed a renewed emphasis. He wasn't the first one; the popes before him have, but he placed this renewed emphasis on what we call the new evangelization. This need to once again, in a renewed way, proclaim our faith. Right? Not just say, well, everybody kind of believes in Jesus, we'll just stick with that, but just to renew in a renewed way, begin to proclaim our faith. What struck me the most, though, and I think it's very providential, especially for this Sunday, what struck me the most about his pontificate, about his papacy, it was just his complete emphasis on mercy. Over and over and over again, he just placed this focus on the Lord's mercy. He gave a lot of very famous interviews, but in one of his first interviews, the interviewer asked him, who is Jorge Mario Bergoglio? Just like, who are you, dude? Help us understand. Who's Jorge Mario Bergoglio? And he thought about it for a second, then he said, I'm a sinner. Then he thought a little bit more, and he said, I'm a sinner upon whom the Lord has shown mercy. Right from the beginning, mercy was what first came to his mind. Later on, the story came out of when he was elected pope. So when you go into the conclave and everything, they start voting. And once the candidate gets enough votes, they'll go ask him in Latin, acceptance, do you accept? And the candidate is to reply, accepto, I accept. But Pope Francis didn't say what he was supposed to say. In that moment, again, the first literal second of him being the pope, what he said, his initial gut reaction was to say this. When they asked him, acceptance, do you accept? He said, I am a sinner, but having relied upon the mercy of Jesus Christ, I accept. The very first thing that came to his mind after he was elected pope was, I've relied on the Lord's mercy. That's how I've survived. Later on, a couple of years later, we're in the Jubilee year of hope right now, but literally within a couple of years of being the pope, he proclaimed a Jubilee year of mercy. Right? So the mercy that the Pope Francis focused on, it's always struck me, and again, that emphasis on mercy, the divine mercy, that mercy is that essential content of our faith. And so today, on this octave of Easter, the culmination of our Easter celebration, today the church even places our attention on that simple fact that mercy, right? Mercy is the cornerstone of this new narrative, this new story that's begun with Jesus' resurrection. Right? I started talking about that last week. Right? Our lives, we all live our lives according to a story, a narrative, whether we know it or not. Each and every single one of us has a narrative in our lives that gives our life meaning and purpose. It's why we wake up in the morning and have something to do. We have a story, a narrative that guides us. For most of us, whether we know it or not, it's the American dream. Again, we think we're good little Catholics, but for most of us, we get out of bed because of the American dream. And I have to go to work, and I have to provide for my children and give them a better life than I had. Okay, and there's good things about that. But then what's the issue we talked about? The issue is that we're always going to run into a limit. We're always going to run into a limit. Whether that's just the limit of our career, and we're just like, well, that's where my career kind of stops. That's the top of it. Whether that's just the limit of our time, whether that's the limit of our patience, whether that's the limit of our health, whether that's just the limit of our ability to control the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And ultimately, even if your life's perfect, which I doubt, but even if your life goes perfectly according to plan, every single one of us runs up into the limit of what we call death. It's just how it is. Every single one of our lives is overshadowed by this limit that we call death. But that's why, as we talked last week, that's why that simple announcement, he's not here, he's been raised, that simple announcement, it begins a whole new destiny for us. A whole new horizon is opened up for us. And to skip over the very boring theology that'll put you right to sleep this morning, this cloudy morning, I'm going to skip all that. But to sum it up, what this announcement does is it announces that there is something that knows no limit. And we know that to be now the mercy of God. God's mercy knows no limit. The mercy of God is what opens up for us that infinitely new horizon, that infinitely new destiny, that new narrative that we can live into that absolutely nothing can threaten. That's the mercy of God. And this is what Jesus points out in our gospel today, right? The very first marching orders then that Jesus gives to the church, right? He appears to the church represented by the apostles, the apostolic ministry. Jesus commands them. What does he say? As the Father sent me, so I sent you. All right, to do what? Jesus says, whose sins you forgive are forgiven them. Very first thing Jesus points out is mercy. The mercy of God is the very first thing that Jesus gives. The mission of the church, this is the mission of salvation, of mercy, the continuation of the mercy of Jesus Christ himself. That's what the church is meant to be, this place of mercy. Pope Francis, one of his most famous, but one of his favorite images of what's the church, he said the church is a field hospital. When people are in battle, they're wounded and they're hurt, and they come into the field hospital, and nobody asks them, hey, how's your cholesterol doing? No, everyone goes, dude, you are messed up. We need to give you some mercy. We need to help you. Pope Francis would say the church is not a museum for all the saints. Here's all the cool people that are all saints. Good job. We all made it. No, Pope Francis says the church is a field hospital. It's a place of mercy, of healing. This is where people come because they're not perfect. This is where people come because they've run up against their limits and they recognize my life is a train wreck. But the Lord opens up for us in his mercy, opens up for us something new. He loved that image. So this is then the thing. Like I said last week, though, we all come to the church. We all come at Easter, this Easter season. We come with a simple faith. We all believe Jesus rose from the dead, right? Well, if you don't, get out. I'm just saying. We all believe Jesus rose from the dead, right? Okay, great. We all believe that. Good job. We know this is because of God's infinite mercy. Great. But the question is, how does that simple, that pure and simple faith, Jesus rose from the dead, how does that actually begin to shape our life? That was the quote from Bernanos that I quoted, right? No one loses faith. People don't really lose their faith. We all still believe Jesus rose from the dead. Great. What happens, though, is the faith ceases to shape our life. This simple belief no longer shapes our life. Again, just think. I'm not trying to be judgy, but think. Remember how we couldn't find a seat to sit in last week? All right. We all had that simple, beautiful, pure faith. But then the challenge is, great, but now what? Now what do I do? Go to church again? Why? I went. I celebrated Easter. I celebrated the thing that I believe in. That's the challenge. How does this faith, how is this meant to shape our lives? And so that's what I want to focus on these next couple of weeks is how does our faith that this guy rose from the dead, which we're all on board with, great, but how does it shape our lives? How are we going to let it shape our lives? How will we allow it to be more than just one more holiday that we celebrate throughout the year? So today, step one, I think, very simply, I think the first point of allowing this faith to shape our lives is this. We have to embrace our belonging to the church whose very content is mercy. We have to embrace our belonging to the church whose very content is mercy. And I'll just explain what I mean by that really quick. For most of us, I think our faith, we can easily think of our faith as like this personal relationship with Jesus. And that's okay. I hope you have a personal relationship with Jesus. But what's the simple challenge with that? The challenge with that is it becomes all of a sudden this personal thing that you have with Jesus, and that's it. When first and foremost, the faith is a belonging to Jesus Christ in and through the church. I've pointed this one out before. You know how Jesus taught us to pray? You remember that prayer that Jesus taught us to pray? Starts with our Father. You remember that prayer? Okay. How does the prayer start? Okay, I just told you. Good job. The prayer starts, our Father. Who's this our we're talking about? Who's that? It doesn't start off, when you pray, say, my Father who art in heaven. No, Jesus says, when you pray, say, our Father. Jesus presumes that this is not just you and God. There's a belonging to something that comes first. And yes, within this belonging in and through the church, we have our personal relationship with Jesus, great, but that doesn't mean we can exclude the rest of it. No, Jesus says within this body, right, so that's our patron St. Paul, he says the body, this concrete thing you run up against, it's not just spiritual or I just pray. No, here's this concrete body that's called the church. If you want a relationship with Jesus, the body of Jesus Christ, It's in and through his church that you have that. So this is the first thing. Do we allow the church, this belonging to the church, first and foremost, does that shape our response to Jesus' resurrection? It was Martin Luther, Marty I call him, he's my boy. Martin Luther, he was the one that first came up with this idea of, I've got me, I don't need you. That's the Protestant, like just core principle. I've got me, I don't need you. I've got me in Jesus, I've got my Bible, I've got my faith, I've got my prayers. I don't need y'all. We know many people like this, right? Don't point fingers at anybody. But we know many people like this. I've got Jesus, I believe in God, I don't need any of this. I don't need you. That's the core Protestant principle. I don't need you. We know people like that. We know our siblings, our friends, we know a lot of people like that. But we have to then think of ourselves too. Do I begin in smaller ways to reject that I need to belong to this church? To belong to Jesus Christ concretely in and through his body, the church. And then, time out, before we all get judgy, and before we all get holier than thou, then we have to ask the question, okay, great, I come to church, but how often do I forget that the essential content of our faith, the number one thing, the essential content of our faith is mercy? How often do we forget that? And instead, we begin to just kind of impose our own ideas, and we get holier than thou, and we get all judgy. How often do we forget that the essential content of our faith is mercy? I'll give you a sort of extreme example, then tone it down to make my point. Many of you know I spent 9 weeks in the Holy Land during seminary, so I spent 9 weeks in Israel and Palestine. And that was a great gift. I don't know if you knew this. Not everyone's American. And that's a beautiful thing. There are other cultures in this world, and they're very beautiful. There's a lot we could learn from the Arab culture, a lot we don't need to learn, but a lot we can learn from the Arab culture. While we were there, one of the people in charge of us, making sure we didn't do stupid stuff, he told us a story of one of the Christian families there that lived there, right? Good, faithful Christian family, church every Sunday, all the Christian things. So there's this Arab Christian family, 4 daughters, beautiful family, great. He said, though, at one point, one of the daughters, because teenagers are the same everywhere, sorry. This one of their daughters began to secretly start dating another boy, a Muslim boy, which in that culture, that's a big no-no. Christian Arabs do not date Muslim Arabs. So that was a big no-no. So they were, having their secret romance, so in love. It was beautiful for them. One day, though, the boyfriend secretly filmed some of their, let's call them indiscretions, and begins to share this around. Okay, as this becomes more and more widely known, the family decides they need to respond to this. And again, in the Arab culture, the response that's given is a common one, which is they put their daughter to death. Okay, in that moment, this good Christian family, what won out at the end of the day? What won out in their lives was not their Christian faith. What won out was their Arab culture. Church every Sunday, but the culture, what won out for them was not mercy. It was they reverted to the Arab response, a very proper cultural response for them, not for us, but a very normal cultural response for them. Okay, for us, we wouldn't ever dream of doing that, because we're Americans. That's not part of our culture. Okay, but how many times, this is the extreme example, but tone it down for us, how many times does our American culture, which is actually a very Protestant culture, I don't know if you knew that either, we're just Protestants at heart, how many times does our culture win out over our faith? How many times does our culture shape our lives more than our faith does? Think, simple examples, think of our belonging to the church. How many times, does the priest make us mad and we're just like, I'll go find a different priest? How many times does the priest have a boring homily and we're just like, I'll go find somebody that preaches better? How many times does somebody at the parish make us mad and we're just like, ditching that church, they're stupid there? That's often our response. Why? Because we're Protestants at heart. We just go find a new one. That's what we do. Or think of then our response of mercy. How often, again, what's the American response if somebody makes you mad? Guess I'm never talking to you again. Shunning you for the next 38 years. Goodbye. That's our cultural response. Okay. How often, though, do we respond in mercy? How often is that our normal sort of response? Again, another simple one is we can easily act one way on Sunday, and then the moment we walk out the doors, we live in a completely different way. Never get on Facebook. If you have Facebook, delete it. But Facebook is just a wonderful, beautiful place for me to discover what people are actually thinking. During Holy Week, Facebook lit up. Facebook lit up with, again, people who are a bit cynical. But it lit up with people saying, oh, here all the Christians go to their Holy Week services. They're going to be holy for a week. And then they're going to go back to and then I won't say what they actually said there. It was kind of X-rated. But essentially calling us out on hypocrisy. Saying, hey, great, y'all are going to church, but we know what you actually do during the week. And again, they're a bit cynical. But also we have to take that in a sort of truth of, well, they're seeing something from somebody. How often, and they know. The content of our faith should be mercy and love and charity. And they recognize when we don't live that. Think, how often does my American culture win out and I go be my American self during the week, but I'll go to church on Sundays? No. How can we begin to allow this simple faith that we live, our belonging to the church, and living out that concrete life of mercy? How can that begin to happen? Like I said, Easter has opened up for us a whole new destiny, like a whole new narrative that's been opened up. And that's a beautiful thing. The challenge, though, is to allow that to begin to shape our lives, our belonging in the church, and living out that mercy. And especially as we remember today, Pope Francis, I think that's what we can't let go of, is that mercy, our mission of mercy, to receive the mercy of God, but then also to show that mercy of God. That has to be at the center, at the core of our response to living this faith.